"Babes, I'm going on a date with my new lover." Cheating wife said. I was shocked. "What nonsense is this? You're not going anywhere." She replied, "Oh, sorry, but I promised him a wild night." My last warning was, walk out that door, and our 14 years of marriage is over. She left laughing as if I was joking. The next day, I sold my house, emptied our joint account, and left divorce papers and vanished, and what she did shocked me. But before I begin, please like and subscribe to the channel. And we'd love to hear which part of the world are you joining us from. Let us know. Now, let's dive into today's story. Roy Calder had built his life with his hands. Not in some dramatic, chest-beating way that made for good stories at barbecues. No grand gestures that require an audience. Just 14 years of showing up, of being present, of doing the work that marriage demanded when no one was watching. He fixed the fence himself when the winter wind knocked it sideways, spending a cold Saturday in March with wood stain under his fingernails and splinters working their way into his palms. He learned how to cook Rose's favorite chili, the one her grandmother used to make because she started working late at the marketing firm downtown. He memorized her coffee order without ever writing it down. Medium vanilla latte, extra shot, no whip, exactly 1 pump of caramel. He knew it the way he knew the sound of her footsteps on the stairs, the way she hummed when she was content, the specific sigh she made when she was truly exhausted versus just pretending to be. They lived outside Clearwater Bend, Missouri, in a quiet suburb that hugged the western edge of the lake where the water turned silver at sunset. The kind of place where neighbors waved even if they didn't know your name, where kids still rode bikes without helmets, where the biggest news was usually about the high school football team or someone's boat breaking loose from the marina. Their house wasn't flashy, but it was solid. Like Roy, 2 stories of cream-colored siding with black shutters, creaky steps that announced every arrival, a front porch just wide enough for 2 chairs and a small table. In the yard stood a maple tree Roy had planted the year they married, a sapling then, barely taller than Rose. Now it stretched toward the sky, its branches thick enough to hold the tire swing he'd hung 3 years ago when they still talked about having children. The house sat on a corner lot where Pinewood Drive met Lakeview Circle. From the kitchen window, you could see Mrs. Patterson walking her golden retriever every morning at 7:15. From the bedroom upstairs, you could catch glimpses of the lake between the neighbors' houses, the water glinting like broken glass when the sun hit it right. Roy worked as a project manager for a construction supply company. Not exciting, not particularly lucrative, but steady, reliable. He left at 7 each morning, came home by 6 unless there was a crisis. He kept his promises. He showed up when he said he would. Rose Calder used to be warm. That was the word that always came to Roy's mind when he thought about the woman he'd married. Warm, not hot, nothing dramatic or consuming, but warm like sunlight through a window, like coffee in your hands on a cool morning, like coming home after a long day to someone who was genuinely happy to see you. She used to laugh easily. Her whole face transformed when she did. Eyes crinkling, nose scrunching slightly, that little gap between her front teeth showing. She spoke fast when she got excited about something, hands moving in elaborate gestures, words tumbling over each other. She'd grab his arm when she wanted his attention, her fingers light but insistent. "Roy, listen to this," and she'd be off, telling him about something that happened at work, or some idea she'd had, or some ridiculous thing she'd seen on her drive home. Over the last year, that warmth had cooled. Not all at once. Nothing dramatic enough to point to and say, that's when it changed. Just a gradual cooling, like the shift from summer to fall. So subtle you didn't notice until one day you reached for her and realized she felt different. Distant. She became sharper, more careful with her words. She measured her responses now, choosing phrases like someone navigating a minefield. Where she used to tell him about her day unprompted, now she offered only vague summaries when asked. Fine. Busy. The usual. Her phone never left her hand anymore. She carried it from room to room, set it face down on the counter when she cooked, checked it constantly with small, secretive glances. She smiled at messages Roy never saw. He noticed the new clothes first. Subtle things. A different style of blouse, lower cut, brighter colors. Skirts that hit above the knee when she used to prefer them longer. New perfume that smelled expensive, floral with something darker underneath. She started going to the gym again, something she hadn't done since their second year of marriage. 3 times a week, then 4, then 5. Her body changed. Tighter, more aware of itself. "You look great," Roy had said one evening, meaning it. Wanting to connect. Wanting that warmth back. "Thanks," she'd replied, barely looking up from her phone. Roy noticed the way she angled herself away from him now when they sat on the couch. The way she stayed on her side of the bed, careful not to let their feet touch under the covers. The way she scheduled dinner with friends he'd never met, outings she never invited him to join. "Just the girls," she'd say, already halfway out the door. He noticed the increased hours at work, the weekend conferences that seemed to spring up monthly, the business trips to Kansas City, to St. Louis, to Chicago. Always necessary, always last minute, always apologetic in a way that didn't quite reach her eyes. Roy noticed everything. He just didn't confront it yet. He believed in timing, in being certain before you acted, in having all the information before you made a move that couldn't be taken back. So he watched, and he waited, and he noticed. He noticed the way she started closing the bathroom door when she showered, something she'd never done before. The way she cleared her browser history daily. The way she volunteered to run errands alone when they used to do them together. The way she actually flinched, when he picked up her phone to hand it to her once when it was ringing. "I've got it," she'd said quickly, snatching it from his hand before he could see the screen. The caller ID had said office, but her face had said something else entirely. Roy wasn't stupid. He'd been called slow before, steady, methodical, careful, but never stupid. He knew what he was seeing. He just wasn't sure yet what he was going to do about it. The hardest part wasn't the knowing. It was the pretending not to know. Coming home each day and kissing her cheek like everything was fine. Asking about her day like he believed the answers. Lying next to her in bed, listening to her breathe, wondering if she was asleep or just pretending. Wondering if she thought about him at all anymore, or if her mind was always somewhere else. With someone else. Some nights, Roy stood in the garage after she'd gone to bed, standing in the dark among the tools and half-finished projects, trying to remember when it had started to feel like this. When had the warmth left? When had she stopped being his wife and become this careful stranger who shared his house? He couldn't pinpoint it. That was the cruelest part. There was no moment he could point to and say, "There, that's when I lost her." It had just happened, gradual as erosion, until one day he looked up and realized the landscape had changed completely. But Roy was patient. He'd always been patient. It was one of his strengths, even if Rose had started treating it like a weakness. He could wait a little longer. He could be sure. The night she said it, she was putting on lipstick. Roy was in the kitchen, rinsing dinner plates. The sound of water running. The smell of dish soap, artificial lemon. Through the doorway, he could see into the hallway where the mirror hung, the one Rose checked before leaving the house. She stood there now, leaning close to her reflection, painting her lips a deep red he'd never seen her wear before. Not for him. He'd known that immediately. The way she was dressed, the black dress he didn't recognize, the one that hugged every curve, the one that was clearly expensive. The heels that made her 3 inches taller. The jewelry, delicate gold at her throat and wrists. The hair, styled in loose waves that had taken her over an hour to perfect. This wasn't the Rose who came home from work tired, who changed into sweatpants and pulled her hair into a messy bun. This was someone else. Someone performing. Someone going somewhere. Roy dried his hands slowly on the dish towel, watching her reflection in the mirror. His heart was beating faster, but his breathing stayed even. Controlled. He was good at that. At staying calm when everything inside wanted to explode. "Babes," Rose said casually, capping the lipstick and dropping it into her purse. She didn't turn to look at him, just spoke to his reflection. "I'm going on a date with my new lover." The words hung in the air between them. Roy's hand stilled on the towel. The water was still running behind him, a steady background hiss. Outside, a car drove past, headlights briefly illuminating the kitchen before moving on. Somewhere down the street, a dog barked twice and went quiet. He didn't raise his voice, didn't slam anything, didn't move. What nonsense is this? He asked quietly. The word choice was deliberate. Nonsense. Not betrayal. Not cruelty. Not the end of everything we built. Just nonsense. Like she was telling him she'd decided to take up skydiving or become a vegan. Something absurd. Something that couldn't possibly be real. Rose sighed. Not guilty. Not ashamed. Annoyed. Like he was being slow on purpose. Like he was the one being unreasonable. Don't start, Roy. She checked her earrings, turning her head left and right. I promised him a wild night. Him. Not someone. Not even a friend. Him. Specific. Possessive. Already belonging to someone else. Roy stepped into the doorway. His reflection appeared in the mirror beside hers. 14 years of marriage, side by side. His face was calm, but something in his eyes had changed. Something had clicked into place, hard and final as a lock turning. You're not going anywhere, he said. It wasn't a plea. Wasn't even angry. Just factual. Simple. The way you tell someone the store was closed, the road was blocked, the decision was made. She laughed. Not nervous laughter. Not the laugh of someone caught doing something wrong. Amused laughter. The laugh of someone who thought this was almost cute. His resistance. His attempt at control. Oh, sorry, Rose replied, picking up her purse. She finally turned to face him, and he saw it clearly now. That unfamiliar confidence. That complete lack of fear. That wasn't a request. She moved toward the door. Roy stepped in her path, not blocking her exactly, but present. Solid. Still calm. Rose. His voice was quiet, but there was steel underneath now. Something she should have recognized, but didn't. You walk out that door, and 14 years of marriage ends tonight. For a moment, just a fraction of a second, something flickered across her face. Uncertainty, maybe a shadow of the woman who used to know him, who might have understood what that tone meant. But then it was gone. She adjusted her purse on her shoulder and gave him a smile that didn't reach her eyes. You always exaggerate, Roy. She stepped around him. Her perfume washed over him as she passed. That new scent, floral and expensive and completely wrong. Her heels clicked on the hardwood floor. One step, two, three. The door handle turned. Roy didn't move. Didn't chase her. Didn't grab her arm or beg or break down. He just stood there, perfectly still, watching her. She paused in the doorway, backlit by the porch light. For a second, he thought she might turn around, might say something, might realize what she was doing. But she didn't. She left smiling. The door closed softly behind her. Not slammed, not rushed, just a gentle click of the latch catching, like she was heading out for groceries. Roy stood in the hallway for a full minute, maybe longer. The house was completely silent now, except for the water still running in the kitchen sink. A waste. He should turn it off. He didn't move. Outside, he heard her car start. The engine turning over, smooth and confident as everything else about her these days. Then the sound of it backing down the driveway, tires on pavement, growing fainter. Gone. Roy walked slowly back to the kitchen, turned off the water, dried his hands again, even though they were already dry, set the towel on the counter with deliberate care, making sure the edges were straight. Then he nodded once. Just once. The kind of nod you give when you've made a decision. When the last possibility has been eliminated and there's only one path left. Roy didn't pour himself a drink. He'd seen that in movies, the betrayed husband, sitting in the dark, drowning his sorrows. That wasn't him. Never had been. He didn't cry either. Didn't punch a wall, or throw something, or call his friends to rage about what had happened. Didn't do any of the things a person was supposed to do when their marriage imploded. Instead, he walked upstairs to the small office, barely more than a spare bedroom with a desk and filing cabinet. Rose never came in here. She called it his man cave, though there was nothing particularly masculine about it. Just a desk, a chair, shelves lined with binders and boxes. Boring. Practical. Exactly the kind of space she'd never bother investigating. Roy opened the bottom drawer of the filing cabinet, moved aside folders labeled with old tax years, insurance documents, warranty information for appliances they'd long since replaced. Behind everything, in a manila folder labeled Home Repair Receipts, 2019, he pulled out a notebook. Spiral-bound. Black cover. Nothing special about it. The kind you could buy at any drugstore. Inside were dates. February 12th. First noticed phone behavior change. February 28th. New gym membership purchased. March 6th. Weekend conference in Kansas City, verified with her company website. No conference scheduled. March 15th. Purchased new clothing. Approximately $600 on credit card statement. March 22nd. Observed subject meeting unknown male at Riverside Cafe. Physical contact confirmed. Hand on arm, leaning close during conversation. Roy had documented everything methodically, dispassionately, like a scientist recording experimental results. Each entry was dated, time-stamped when possible, with supporting evidence referenced. He turned the pages slowly, reviewing months of careful observation. April 3rd. Overheard phone conversation. Laughter. Intimacy in tone. Subject, moved to garage when I entered room. April 18th. Discovered search history before deletion. How to prepare for divorce. Protecting assets in separation. Missouri divorce laws, community property. That one had been the first real confirmation. Not just an affair. Planning. Preparation. Roy had started digging deeper after that. April 25th. Bank transfer, $5,000 from joint savings to account in her name only. Second transfer, noted same week, $3,200. May 2nd. Consultation with divorce attorney. Confirmed via calendar entry briefly visible on phone screen before deletion. May 10th. Subject discussed clean exit strategy with unknown contact via text message. Mentioned timing and maximizing settlement. The notebook continued. Page after page. Names of attorneys she'd researched. Financial transfers she'd made. Conversations she'd had with friends about getting what she deserved and not being stupid about it like other women. She wasn't just cheating. She was preparing to take everything. The house, the savings, the retirement accounts, everything they'd built together, she'd been quietly positioning to claim as primarily hers. Documented contributions, separate finances, a paper trail that would make her look like the responsible one, the one who'd held everything together while Roy was just steady old Roy. Predictable, reliable, easy to paint as the one who'd let her down somehow. Roy closed the notebook and sat back in the chair. The house was so quiet. He could hear the refrigerator humming downstairs, the settling creak of old wood, the distant sound of the Pattersons' dog barking next door. She thinks I'm slow, he said aloud to the empty room. His voice sounded strange, calm, almost curious, like he was making an observation about someone else's situation. He opened the notebook again and flipped to the back pages. Blank. Waiting. Roy picked up a pen. That night, he didn't sleep. He planned. The first thing Roy did was call in sick to work. He never called in sick. In 14 years, he'd used maybe 5 sick days total. His supervisor, Tom, sounded genuinely concerned. You okay, Roy? You sound fine. Stomach thing, Roy said, keeping his voice steady. Probably something I ate. Should be better tomorrow. Take care of yourself, man. We got it covered. Roy hung up and immediately began making calls. An attorney first. Not one of the flashy ones with billboards. Someone recommended by a colleague years ago during casual conversation about estate planning. Someone discreet. Someone good. I need to understand my options, Roy said when the receptionist connected him. For divorce. The consultation was scheduled for that afternoon. 3 o'clock. He marked it down. Next, the bank. He needed to understand exactly what was legally his, what was joint, what could be moved, and what couldn't. He spent 2 hours on hold, transfer between departments, finally connected with someone who could pull complete account histories. I'm seeing several large transfers out of your joint savings, the representative said, to an account under just your wife's name. Were you aware of those? I'm now, Roy replied. Well, technically, joint account means either party can. Understand. What can I move legally? Right now. Today. There was a pause. Sir, I'd recommend you speak with an attorney before. I have one. 3 o'clock today. What can I move? The representative walked him through it. Account by account. What was protected? What wasn't? What required both signatures? What didn't? Roy took notes in the same methodical handwriting that filled his notebook. By noon, he'd identified exactly what he could access. Money he'd inherited from his father and kept in a separate account. Untouchable, legally his. The checking account used for household expenses, joint, but he could withdraw his verified contributions. The emergency fund they'd built together, that was stickier, but there were ways. The house was the complication. But Roy had documentation. He'd put down the entire down payment from his inheritance. He'd paid for every major renovation. He had receipts, canceled checks, records going back to the day they'd signed the papers. Rose had contributed, yes, but not nearly as much as she probably thought she could claim. At 2:30, Roy changed into a clean shirt and drove to the attorney's office. David Brennan was in his mid-50s, with gray hair and reading glasses he kept on a chain around his neck. His office was small, organized, professional without being pretentious. Diplomas on the wall, family photos on the desk. A man who did his job well and went home at 5. Roy liked him immediately. "So," Brennan said, settling into his chair across from Roy. "Tell me what's going on." Roy did. Clearly, chronologically. No emotion, just facts. The affair, the planning, the financial movements. He handed over copies from his notebook. He made duplicates that morning, the originals safely locked away. Brennan read through everything slowly, his expression neutral. When he finished, he set the papers down and looked at Roy with something like respect. "You've been thorough. I pay attention. I can see that." Brennan leaned forward, folding his hands on the desk. "Here's what you need to understand, Roy. Missouri is a no-fault divorce state, which means her adultery doesn't matter much legally. It won't affect the division of assets." Roy nodded. He'd researched that already. However, Brennan continued, this evidence of financial manipulation, the secret transfers, the preparation, the intent to deceive, that's different. That shows bad faith. A judge won't look kindly on that. "What are my options?" Brennan pulled out a yellow legal pad and began making notes. "First, you need to protect yourself immediately. Whatever you can legally move, move it. Today. Don't wait. Second, we file first. You file in the jurisdiction most favorable to you, if you're willing to relocate." "I am." Brennan paused, studying Roy's face. "You're certain? This is your home, your job, there's nothing here for me anymore." A beat of silence. Then Brennan nodded and continued writing. They spent the next hour going through details. What Roy could do today, what needed to wait, what documentation they needed, what could be claimed as separate property versus marital, what the likely outcomes were for various scenarios. "If we play this right," Brennan said finally, "she's going to walk away with significantly less than she's planning on." "That's not my goal," Roy said quietly. Brennan raised an eyebrow. "I don't care about revenge," Roy continued. "I just want to protect what's mine. I want to be fair. I want this done cleanly, legally, properly. That's a good mindset. It'll serve you well." Brennan stood, extending his hand. "I'll start the paperwork today. You start executing the financial plan we discussed." And Roy, "Yes, you're doing the right thing. Getting ahead of this. Most people wait until they're drowning. You're swimming to shore while you still can." Roy shook his hand and left. By 5 o'clock, he was back home. Rose's car wasn't in the driveway. He hadn't expected it to be. He opened his laptop and began the next phase. Finding a new job wasn't hard. Roy was good at what he did. Boring, maybe. Not flashy, but reliable. Competent. The kind of employee companies were always looking for. He updated his resume, something he hadn't touched in 8 years, and began browsing listings. South Carolina had possibilities. North Carolina, Tennessee, states with favorable divorce laws if he established residency. States far enough away that Rose couldn't just show up on a whim. States where he could start completely fresh. He applied to 6 positions that night, tailored each application carefully, highlighted his steady work history, his project completions, his reliability. 3 responded by the next afternoon requesting interviews. He scheduled them all. A week passed. Rose came home sporadically, late at night, smelling of wine and someone else's cologne. She slept in the guest room now, not even pretending. In the mornings, she'd emerge looking tired, makeup smudged, and pour coffee without speaking to Roy. He'd sit at the kitchen table with his own coffee, reading the news on his tablet, not acknowledging her either. The silence between them was vast. On the third day, she finally spoke. "We should talk." Roy looked up from his tablet. "About?" She leaned against the counter, holding her mug with both hands. "About what happens next." "Okay. I think we both know this isn't working anymore." "I'd say it stopped working about 6 months ago," Roy replied calmly. She blinked, surprised he'd pinpointed it so exactly. "Right. Well, I think we should start thinking about separation. Dividing things. Moving on." "I agree." Another flicker of surprise crossed her face. She'd expected resistance, maybe anger, something. "You do?" "Yes." Roy set down his tablet. "I think you should get an attorney. I'll get one too. We'll handle this properly." Rose nodded slowly. "Okay, that's mature of you. I try." She took a sip of coffee, studying him over the rim of the mug. "You're taking this better than I expected." "What did you expect?" "I don't know. Yelling. Accusations. Drama. That's not really my style." "No," she said quietly. "I guess it's not." She stood there a moment longer, like she wanted to say something else. Then she shook her head and went back upstairs. Roy returned to his tablet. He had an interview in 2 hours. Phone call with a construction supply company in Greenville, South Carolina. He'd already researched the area. Nice. Growing. Near a lake, which he'd always liked. Far enough away. The interview went well. They wanted him to come in person the following week. He agreed immediately and booked a flight. Rose never asked where he was going. She didn't ask much of anything anymore. The second week, Roy began quietly selling things. Nothing obvious. Nothing she'd notice immediately. The fishing gear he'd accumulated over the years, rarely used, stored in the garage. The old guitar he'd bought in college and never learned to play properly. The tools he had duplicates of. Small things. Practical things. He sold them online, met buyers in parking lots, converted everything to cash. Kept it in a fireproof safe he'd installed behind the panel in his office closet. The safe Rose didn't know about because she'd never looked. He sold his coin collection, inherited from his grandfather, purely his property. $3,000. The buyer met him at a coffee shop, counted out the bills carefully, shook Roy's hand. "Beautiful collection," the man said. "Shame to let it go. Time to move on," Roy replied. He liquidated the stocks he'd bought before the marriage. His 401k was protected. She couldn't touch that anyway. But the personal investment account, the one he'd funded entirely himself, he converted to cash and moved to a new account in a different bank. One Rose had never heard of. One that didn't send statements to the house. Everything he did was legal. Documented. Careful. He kept receipts for everything. Proof of what was his, what he'd contributed, what he'd earned independently. The notebook grew thicker. The job in Greenville made him an offer. Good salary. Relocation package. Start date in 3 weeks. Roy accepted. He gave notice at his current job. Tom seemed genuinely sad. "You've been here forever, Roy. What's the occasion?" "Time for a change." "Everything okay at home?" Roy smiled. Getting there. His last day was marked with a small cake in a break room. Awkward goodbyes. Promises to stay in touch that both parties knew wouldn't happen. Roy collected his personal items from his desk, a photo of the house, a calendar Rose had given him years ago, a coffee mug with the company logo, and drove home for what he knew would be one of the last times. Rose was out. Again. Roy went upstairs to his office and pulled out the divorce papers Brennan had prepared. Standard. Clean. Fair division of assets, based on documented contributions. No alimony requested. Roy didn't want to be tied to her financially in any way. Just a clear split and a clean break. He read through every page carefully. Sign where indicated. Put them in an envelope. Then he packed. Not everything. Just essentials. Clothes for 2 weeks. Toiletries. Laptop. Important documents. Birth certificate. Passport. Financial records. The notebook. Photos from before, when they were happy, when it was real. He didn't know why he was taking those. Maybe just to remember what he'd had. What he'd lost. Or maybe as proof it had been real once. That he hadn't imagined it. He loaded everything into his truck in the middle of the night when Rose was wherever she spent her nights now. Made multiple trips. Systematic. Organized. The house looked strange with his things gone. Emptier. Echoes where there hadn't been before. He left the furniture. Most of it had been Rose's choice anyway. the decorations, the artwork, the throw pillows she loved and he'd tolerated. She could have it all. On the kitchen table, he laid out the divorce papers. Next to them, he placed a single handwritten note. He'd rewritten it 4 times, trying to find the right words. Professional but not cold. Clear but not cruel. In the end, he settled on something simple. You played chess. I finished the board. The house is yours if you can afford it. Everything in it, too. I've taken only what's mine. My attorney is David Brennan. You'll hear from him. I hope you find what you're looking for. No signature. She knew who it was from. Roy stood in the kitchen for a long moment, looking around. 14 years in this house. First home. First real sense of permanence. The place where he'd imagined growing old, raising children, building something that lasted. The maple tree was visible through the window, silhouetted against the streetlight. Some things survived storms. Some didn't. Roy walked out, locked the door, and got in his truck. He didn't look back. New phone, purchased 2 days ago, activated that morning. New number. Rose didn't have it. His family did. His attorney did. His new employer did. That was enough. New town. New state. New job. New life. The drive to South Carolina took 13 hours. Roy stopped once for gas and coffee. Otherwise, he just drove. Watched Missouri disappear in the rearview mirror. Watched the landscape change. Trees growing thicker. Hills becoming more pronounced. By the time he reached Greenville, dawn was breaking. He found the apartment he'd rented sight unseen, based on photos and a video call with the landlord. Small, clean, furnished, temporary, until he figured out what came next. It was perfect. Roy unloaded his truck, carried his belongings up 2 flights of stairs, set up his laptop, made the bed with fresh sheets he'd bought at a store along the way. Then he sat on the couch and allowed himself, for the first time in weeks, to simply breathe. It was done. Rose came home the next afternoon, still glowing. The glow had nothing to do with Roy. It never did anymore. It was the residue of the night before, Jason's hands, Jason's attention, Jason's promises about their future together. She felt powerful, desired, alive in a way she hadn't felt in years. Marriage to Roy had been comfortable, safe, but eventually, comfortable became suffocating. Safe became boring. Jason made her feel dangerous. She hummed to herself as she unlocked the front door, already thinking about the shower she needed, the work email she'd ignored, the lunch date Jason had suggested for later in the week. The house felt wrong immediately. Empty. Not just quiet. They had quiet before. This was different. An absence of presence. The air itself felt thinner somehow. Her humming stopped. She set her purse down slowly, frowning. Looked around the entryway. Everything looked normal. Same coat rack. Same table. Same mirror. But something was off. She walked into the living room. The couch was there. The TV. The bookshelves. All of it exactly where it had been. Except it wasn't. It took her a moment to identify what was missing. Small things. Roy's reading glasses he kept on the side table. The biography he'd been working through for weeks. The coasters he insisted on using gone. Rose's frown deepened. She moved to the kitchen. That's when she saw the papers on the table. Official looking. Crisp white paper. Legal letterhead. Her breath caught. She picked them up with trembling hands. The first page was dense with text, formatted in that particular way legal documents always were. Her eyes scanned quickly, picking out words that made her stomach drop. Petition for dissolution of marriage. Respondent, Rose and Calder. Petitioner, Roy Michael Calder. Her mouth went dry. He'd filed. Roy had actually filed. She flipped through the pages. Division of assets. Property settlement. Everything laid out in cold, precise language. Then she saw the note. Her hand was shaking now. Actually shaking. You played chess. I finished the board. What the hell? She whispered. She grabbed her phone, fingers clumsy as she pulled up Roy's number. Hit call. Straight to voicemail. This number has been disconnected or is no longer in service. Rose stared at her phone. That wasn't possible. When was the last time she called Roy? Weeks, maybe. But his number couldn't just be gone. She tried again. Same message. This isn't funny, she said aloud to the empty kitchen. She checked the papers again. Bank account information. Asset division. Her eyes caught on specific numbers. Joint savings, $0. Joint checking, $427.16. Emergency fund, $0. No, Rose breathed. No, no, no. She opened her laptop, fingers flying across the keyboard. Logged into their bank. The joint account page loaded. Her vision blurred at the edges. 0. He'd taken it all. No, not all. She clicked through the transaction history. He'd taken exactly what he could prove he'd contributed. Every withdrawal matched deposits. She could track to his paychecks, his inheritance, his personal sales. Legal. Precise. Perfectly calculated. She checked her personal account, the one she'd been moving money into for months. That was still there, her safety net, her exit strategy. Except now it looked pathetic. $7,000. She thought it was clever, building this up gradually. Now it looked like exactly what it was. Not nearly enough. Rose called Roy's cell again. Same message. She tried his work number. It rang twice before someone picked up. Midwest Construction Supply, this is Tom. Hi. Yes. I'm trying to reach Roy Calder. A pause. Roy doesn't work here anymore. The room tilted slightly. What? He gave his notice a couple weeks ago. His last day was Friday. Can I help you with something? Rose hung up without answering. She sat down hard in one of the kitchen chairs, the papers still clutched in her hand. This wasn't how it was supposed to happen. Roy was supposed to be devastated, angry, begging her to stay, making mistakes driven by emotion, giving her leverage to negotiate, to claim she'd been forced to protect herself from his unreasonable behavior. Instead, he'd vanished. Worse, every move she made now was going to reveal how exposed she actually was. She'd been so careful, she thought, moving money slowly, researching attorneys, building her case. But she'd built it all on the assumption that Roy would react emotionally, that he'd fight in court, that he'd give her ammunition. He hadn't fought at all. He'd just disappeared. Rose pulled up Jason's number. He'd help. He'd said he loved her. He'd said they had a future together. She typed, "We need to talk." Roy filed for divorce. "Can you come over?" She watched the 3 dots appear, showing he was typing. Then they disappeared. No response. She waited 5 minutes. 10. Nothing. She called him. It rang 4 times, then went to voicemail. "Hey, it's Jason. Leave a message." "Jason, it's me. I need to talk to you." "Roy. He filed for divorce, and he's gone, and I don't know what's happening. Call me back. Please." An hour passed. No response. 2 hours. Nothing. By evening, she tried again. The call went straight to voicemail this time. No ringing. Just immediate voicemail. He'd blocked her. Rose sat on the couch as the light faded outside, her phone in her lap, staring at nothing. Jason was gone. Roy was gone. The money was gone. Everything she'd planned, every careful move she'd made, had somehow led to this moment. Sitting alone in a house that suddenly felt too big, too empty, too quiet. She thought she was in control. She'd been so certain. The days that followed were a blur of panic and denial. Rose called the attorney she consulted with months ago. Left 3 messages before getting a call back. "Ms. Calder, I remember. You were asking about asset protection. What can I do for you? My husband filed for divorce. In South Carolina." A pause. "South Carolina? Does he live there?" I don't know. Maybe? He left. He's gone. I see. Well, if he's established residency there and filed first, you'll need to respond in that jurisdiction. I don't practice in South Carolina. I can recommend someone, but how could he do that? Just leave and file somewhere else. It's legal. If he's established residency, even just 6 months in some states, he can file there. You'll need to respond through the court system there, or potentially contest the jurisdiction, but that's difficult and expensive. Rose felt sick. How much would this cost? Defending an out-of-state divorce with contested assets? $20,000. Maybe more, depending on complexity. She had $7,000. The attorney continued talking, explaining options, processes, but Rose barely heard him. She thanked him mechanically and hung up. Bills started arriving. The mortgage, the utilities, the car payment, all things they'd been splitting, paying from joint accounts that no longer had money in them. Her personal checking had enough to cover 1 month. Maybe 2 if she was careful. Then what? She tried calling Jason again. Blocked. She drove to his apartment complex. Rang his buzzer. No answer. She waited in her car for 3 hours until she saw him coming out with another woman. Younger. Laughing at something he'd said. Rose watched them get into his car and drive away. She sat there for a long time after they'd gone, her hands gripping the steering wheel, knuckles white. 3 weeks after Roy left, Rose stood in the kitchen of the house she could no longer afford. The mortgage was due. She didn't have it. Her credit card was maxed. She'd been using it to cover bills, thinking she'd pay it off once the divorce settlement came through. Except there wasn't going to be a settlement. Not the kind she'd imagined. She'd finally managed to get a different attorney. Cheaper, less experienced. He'd reviewed the paperwork Roy's lawyer had sent. He's being pretty fair, actually, the attorney said. Given the circumstances. Fair? He took everything. No, Ms. Calder. He took what he could document as a separate property. The house, he's not contesting your claim to it, but you'll need to refinance to remove his name. The joint accounts. He withdrew his documented contributions. That's within his legal rights. What he's proposing for division of actual marital assets is pretty standard. But I don't have anything. The attorney had given her a look that somehow managed to be both sympathetic and judgmental. You might want to consider accepting his terms. Fighting this will cost more than you'll gain. Rose had left that meeting feeling hollowed out. She called her mother. Asked for help. I told you, her mother said. I told you Roy was a good man. What did you expect would happen? I expected him to fight for our marriage. Did you? When you were going on dates with another man. When you were planning to leave him. You don't get to have it both ways, Rose. Her mother had agreed to loan her $2,000. That was it. Rose's friends, the ones she'd confided in about her plans, had mostly gone quiet. Mutual friends had taken Roy's side without ever saying so. Invitations stopped. Group chats she'd been part of went silent when she joined. She'd become toxic. The woman who left her loyal husband for someone who dropped her the moment things got complicated. She sold her car, bought something cheaper, used the difference to cover bills. She took a second job, nights at a restaurant, serving drinks to men who looked at her the way Jason used to look at her. It wasn't enough. 6 weeks after Roy left, Rose drove to the lake. The same spot where they used to come together years ago when things were good. When they talk about the future and hold hands and watch the sunset. She sat in her car with the windows down, listening to the water lap against the shore. This wasn't supposed to happen. She was supposed to leave him. On her terms. With her plan. Come out ahead. Instead, she was scrambling. Drowning. Roy had known. The whole time, he'd known. And he'd planned. While she thought she was being clever, moving money, building her case, he'd been 10 steps ahead. You played chess. I finished the board. Rose put her head down on the steering wheel and finally let herself cry. Not for Roy. For everything she'd lost. For the future she'd imagined that was never going to happen. For the life she'd thrown away because comfortable seemed like a prison instead of a gift. The sun set over the lake, painting the water gold and orange and pink. Rose cried until there was nothing left. Then she drove home to the too big house she couldn't afford and started packing. Act N 3. What Rose never knew was this. Roy had discovered her plan 6 months earlier. Not through spying. Not through hacking her phone or following her. Just by paying attention. It had started with a conversation he'd overheard accidentally. He'd come home early one day, a meeting canceled, decided to take the afternoon off. His truck had been quiet pulling into the driveway. Rose's car was there, but she didn't know he was home. He'd walked in through the garage, heading for the kitchen to grab water before surprising her. That's when he heard her voice. On the phone. Laughing. I know, but I have to be smart about it. Can't just leave with nothing. Roy had frozen just inside the mudroom, the door to the kitchen slightly ajar. Yeah, my attorney said the same thing. Establish separate finances. Document everything. Make sure I'm protected. A pause. Roy? Oh, he doesn't suspect anything. He's too trusting. Too steady. You know, the way she said steady made it sound like a weakness. An insult. I just need a few more months to get everything lined up. Then I'll be free. We'll be free. Roy had stood there, perfectly still, barely breathing. I promise. Just be patient with me, okay? I love you too. She'd hung up. Roy had heard her footsteps moving upstairs. He'd waited until she was gone, then quietly backed out through the garage and drove away. He'd sat in a parking lot for an hour, hands on the steering wheel, staring at nothing. Then he'd gone home, acted completely normal, and started his own planning. That had been February. By March, he confirmed the affair, documented the financial movements, started researching divorce law. By April, he'd found the attorney, started exploring new jobs, begun the process of protecting himself. Rose had thought she was being clever, careful, strategic. She just didn't know him as well as she thought she did. Roy wasn't stupid. He wasn't slow. He was patient. And patient men, when they finally moved decisively. The major twist came 4 months after Roy left, when Rose finally stood in a South Carolina courtroom, having managed to scrape together enough money to appear. She'd worn her best business suit, done her makeup carefully, prepared her arguments about why the division of assets wasn't fair, about how Roy had manipulated the situation, about how she deserved more. Her cheap attorney sat next to her, looking nervous. Roy sat across the aisle with David Brennan. Roy looked different, tanned, healthier. There was a calm about him that Rose didn't recognize. Or maybe she'd never really looked before. The judge, a gray-haired woman with sharp eyes and no-nonsense tolerance, reviewed the documents spread before her. Mrs. Calder, the judge said, "Your petition claims that the asset division proposed is unfair, that your husband engaged in financial misconduct." "Yes, Your Honor." Rose stood, hands clasped tightly. "He emptied our accounts without warning, left me with nothing." And yet, the judge continued, not looking up from the papers, "The record shows that you had been transferring funds into a separate account for 6 months prior to separation. In total, approximately $18,000 from joint savings." Rose's mouth went dry. I was just being careful. In case something happened." "In case of what, Mrs. Calder?" Silence. The judge looked up now, her gaze steady. "The evidence shows that Mr. Calder withdrew only funds he could document as separate property or as verified contributions to joint accounts. You, however, transferred marital assets without disclosure or agreement. But, additionally," the judge continued, "Mr. Calder filed first in a state where he has now established 6 months of continuous residency. He filed in good faith with a fair division proposal. You filed a counterclaim alleging financial abuse, but the evidence suggests the opposite." Rose felt the floor shifting beneath her. "Your Honor, Heath abandoned me. Did he? Or did you make it clear you were ending the marriage when you openly informed him you were going on a date with another man?" Her attorney winced. Rose had mentioned that in her filing, trying to paint herself as the honest one, the one who'd been upfront. It had backfired spectacularly. The judge set down the papers and looked directly at Rose. "Mrs. Calder, I'm going to approve Mr. Calder's proposed settlement. The division is fair and well documented. If you wish to appeal, that's your right. But I'll tell you now that you're unlikely to get a better outcome. This court does not look kindly on attempts to manipulate the system." The gavel came down. Rose stood there stunned. It was over. Roy had filed first, in a different state, with documented proof of everything, with evidence of her financial manipulation and intent. Her case had collapsed before it began. She'd walked into the courtroom thinking she still had leverage, still had options. She'd walked out with nothing except the reality that she would be paying Roy back for the funds she'd taken from her joint accounts. The judge hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't needed to. Roy now lived near Lake Hartwell, South Carolina, renting a small cabin that sat about 50 yards from the water. It wasn't fancy. 1 bedroom, 1 bathroom, a living area that flowed into a kitchen barely big enough for 1 person. But it had a porch that overlooked the lake, and in the mornings, the mist rose off the water like something from a painting. He'd taken a job in Greenville and exceeded expectations. Within 2 months, they'd promoted him. Within 4, they'd given him a team to manage. He was good at what he did, always had been. The difference now was that he worked for himself, not to prove anything, not to build something with someone else, just to be competent, to be satisfied with his own efforts. He woke early, ran by the shore, following a trail that wound through pine trees and opened on rocky beaches. The air was different here, cleaner, or maybe just breathed easier. He cooked simple meals, learned to make things he'd never tried before, experimented with spices and techniques. Sometimes they turned out well. Sometimes they didn't. It didn't matter. There was no one to disappoint. He kept the cabin clean. Not obsessively, just maintained things in their place. Order that brought peace instead of requirement. He made a few friends. Co-workers who invited him to grab a beer after work. Neighbors who waved when they saw him running. The woman who worked at the coffee shop he went on Sunday mornings, who knew his order now without asking. Simple medium vanilla latte, no extra shot, no caramel. Different order, different life. One evening, about 5 months after he'd left Missouri, Roy's phone buzzed with an email notification. He almost didn't check it. He'd learned to let notifications wait, to not jump every time something demanded attention. But something made him look. From Rose Calder. Subject, I'm sorry. His finger hovered over the delete button. Then, curious despite himself, he opened it. The email was long, rambling in places, emotional in a way that might have moved him once. She was sorry. She'd made mistakes. She'd been confused, stressed, looking for something she didn't understand. She hadn't meant to hurt him. She'd loved him, still loved him. Could they talk? Could they try to fix this? She'd made terrible choices, but she wanted to make it right. She missed him, missed their life, missed who they'd been. The email went on. Paragraph after paragraph of apologies and justifications and appeals. Roy read it once, completely. Then he deleted it. No reply. His finger didn't hesitate. There was no debate. No internal struggle about whether he was being too harsh, too final. The email disappeared from his inbox. He set the phone down and went out to the porch. The sun was setting over the lake, turning the water to copper and gold. A fish jumped somewhere out in the middle, the splash carrying across the still air. Birds called from the trees. Somewhere a dog barked. Roy sat in the chair he'd bought from a yard sale, holding a beer he wasn't really drinking, just enjoying the weight of the cold bottle in his hand. He didn't think about Rose. He didn't think about what might have been. He just sat and breathed and watched the day end. Peace wasn't loud. It was this. Quiet. Simple. Sufficient. He stayed there until the stars came out, scattered across the sky like something spilled, and even then he didn't rush inside. There was nowhere he needed to be. Months later, nearly a year after he'd left Clearwater Bend, Roy had to return briefly to Missouri. Final paperwork to sign. The house had sold. Rose had managed to hold on to it for 7 months before finally accepting she couldn't afford it. The sale price was lower than it should have been. Rush sales always were. Roy didn't care. He'd signed off on his portion being transferred to Rose. Let her have that, at least. She needed it more than he did. His portion had amounted to the original down payment plus documented renovations. $70,000. Rose got the rest after paying off the mortgage. Maybe $20,000. The attorney had asked if Roy wanted to fight for more. No, Roy had said, I just want it done. So he drove back. The trip felt strange. Familiar roads that didn't feel like his anymore. Towns he recognized, but had no connection to. He'd scheduled the signing for 2 in the afternoon. Needed to pick up a few stored items from a facility near his old house. Things he'd left behind, not sure if he'd ever want them. After the signing, he decided to stop at the grocery store. He needed supplies for the drive back. Water, snacks, maybe something for dinner he could eat in the hotel room. The store was the same one they'd always gone to. Roy hadn't thought about that when he pulled into the parking lot. It was just convenient. Close. He was in the produce section, examining apples without really seeing them when he felt eyes on him. He looked up. Rose stood about 20 feet away, near the tomatoes. She'd frozen mid-reach, her hand extended toward a display she was no longer looking at. For a moment, neither of them moved. She looked older, tired in a way that went deeper than lack of sleep. Thinner, but not in a healthy way. Her hair was different, shorter, practical. No expensive highlights. Her clothes were ordinary. Budget. The confidence was gone. That shimmer she'd carried when she left him for her night with Jason. That certainty. Gone. Their eyes met. He watched her take a breath. Saw her mouth open. She was going to speak. Roy nodded. Once. Politely. The way you'd acknowledge a stranger you made eye contact with in passing. Then he turned back to the apples, selected 3, and put them in his basket. When he looked up again, Rose was still standing there. Her hand had dropped. Her mouth had closed. She looked stricken, lost. Roy moved past her toward the checkout. Didn't stop. Didn't speak. Not out of cruelty. Out of indifference. Genuine, complete indifference. She'd become a stranger. Someone he used to know. Someone who'd once been important, but was now just part of a past he'd walked away from. No anger. No satisfaction. No lingering hurt. Just nothing. As he paid for his groceries, he could see her in his peripheral vision, still standing there, watching him. He left the store without looking back. As Roy drove out of Clearwater Bend for what he knew would be the last time, he passed the street where their house had stood. He could see the maple tree from the main road. Tall now, mature, its branches spread wide, leaves rustling in the breeze. He'd planted it 14 years ago with Rose standing next to him, laughing at how small it was, teasing him that it would never grow. But it had. Strong, solid, surviving. Roy drove past without slowing. Some things survived storms. Some didn't. And sometimes the strongest thing you could do was know the difference. The road stretched ahead, leading south, leading home to a small cabin by a different lake, in a different state, where a different life was waiting. A life that was quiet, simple, his. Roy turned up the radio and kept driving. He never looked back.